where
chats, and then the environment was cleaned up over
first time I was
1,000.
hearing about this stuff. It was totally new to me.
With social impact consulting. Hello everyone, my name is Efwa Elens Ede with Social Impact Consulting. I'm a development consultant with 20 years of experience working with NGOs, international NGOs, and bilateral agencies to work in project support, monitoring and evaluation, and civil society strengthening. So now, I saw that local NGOs lack the capacity to manage large-scale projects, which can in turn impact their various communities because they have the connection based on their backgrounds. So this made me create this channel so that I can add value to you for free once you subscribe to this channel and get notified of upcoming videos. I look forward to hearing from you. Hello everyone, how you doing today? Welcome to the Development Sector Series, which is called Devsectorseries. Make sure you like and share this broadcast so we meet as many people as possible. Let me also know where you're watching from so I can thank you personally. Follow and connect with me on all my social media handles for future updates, future broadcasts. I have some exciting things coming up. If you have any questions about the discussion in this program, please include in the comments so that we can engage in an interactive discussion. So today we're going to have a really interesting conversation. Our guest today, Dr. Hussaini Abdu, the Country Director of CARE International Nigeria. He is a multi-layered development practitioner whose expertise ranges from humanitarian interventions, advocacy, project management, strategic planning, strategic communications, much more, the whole gamut. We are going to be engaging in a conversation about humanitarian services in Nigeria, successes and challenges. What we pretty much hear is just the hearsay, what is going on with some of these disaster regions in Nigeria. So we're going to be having those kind of conversations. So what I'm going to do right now is go over his bio, and then we will continue this conversation. Dr. Hussaini Abdu is the country director of CARE International in Nigeria, an earlier country director of Plan International and Action Aid International. As the head of Action Aid International Democracy and Governance Program, he coordinated and developed democracy and governance programs in 23 different African countries, supported state institutions, and worked closely with international and regional organizations including the African Union, Southern African Development Cooperation (SADC), the Economic Community of West African States (ECOWAS), European Union, OECD, and the UN system, amongst others. Dr. Abdu has worked in over 10 different countries and traveled for different program and operational missions to over 45 countries in the last 15 years. This led to some interesting and pioneering advocacy in Africa and Europe, including advocacy on environment, education, HIV/AIDS, debt, youth participation, illicit financial flow, and development financing. In the last 2.5 decades, Dr. Abdu invested actively in influencing people, communities, institutions, and systems. A public intellectual, development and humanitarian specialist, activist, and leader. He is passionate about social justice and committed to human and environmental development. He has extensive international strategic leadership spanning over 25 years. Dr. Abdu holds a PhD in political science from Bayero University, Kano, Nigeria. He taught political science and defense studies at the Nigerian Defense Academy, Kaduna, and has written extensively in books and journals. He authored Clash of Identity, State, Society, and Ethno-Religious Conflicts in Northern Nigeria in 2010. The book is a major contribution to the understanding of the dynamics of violent conflicts in Northern Nigeria. He is a laureate of different institutions, a trained and certified on strategic leadership, project management, policy advocacy, and strategic engagement, finance management, negotiation, and strategic communication in different institutions in Africa, Asia, Europe, and America. Allow me to introduce to some and present to others. Hello, Dr. Hussaini. How are you this afternoon?
I'm very well. I'm dead. I couldn't imagine that long volume of me. I can't remember some of the things you mentioned.
That's what most of my guests say. Most of my guests will say, "Is that me?"
Yeah, doesn't look like me.
You know, a lot of times when we're working, we just put our heads to the ground and just keep working. We say, okay, I've done one thing. Okay, on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. So we're not really, we just don't realize that these things are piling up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so good to see you. Thank you so much for taking time out.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the generous introduction.
No problem. I think I put on my LinkedIn page, I said, I'm having a conversation with Dr. Hussaini, and I said, he's one of those practitioners that make me say, man, I'm not doing enough. I need to do more. Thank you so much for coming, because the conversation about humanitarian services in Nigeria, I feel like the public just hears surface information about what's going on over there. It's just kind of like, okay, we know that there's disaster, we know that there's extremist activities going on, but there's just kind of like such a distance between what's going over there and the rest of the country, and it's important that we make those connections. So I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
Good. So we're gonna get started. So what is the generic status of humanitarian services in Northern Nigeria?
Well, I think that Northern Nigeria has been going through a major humanitarian crisis, particularly in the northeast of the country. We are beginning to see elements of that in the northwest in recent times. But largely, major humanitarian responses are actually taking place at the moment in the northeast. The northeast region has been ravaged by violent conflicts that resulted to the displacement of millions of people. About 7 million people have been displaced as a result of this crisis. And over this period, we've seen other millions of people that have been impacted, either by their livelihood concerns, or major issues around this humanitarian crisis in that region. Most of the displaced people, about 30% of them, are staying in the IDP camps. There are few as refugees in neighboring countries of Chad, Niger, and Cameroon. Then we have about 70% of that number staying with host communities. And therefore meaning that the host communities also get their facilities overstressed. And in fact, these are communities that actually don't even have those facilities, water, health services, schools, and all that. So they get overstressed. And so at the moment, a lot of organizations, international NGOs, local NGOs, the UN system, have been involved in that response. It's about 11 years old crisis at the moment.
That's a long time.
So is one of the long crises in the world today, almost at the same level as situations in South Sudan and all those places. So it's 11 years, a long time. There are a generation of children that have been born into this crisis. So what are the major crisis issues we experience there? One, you have strong, when we say displacement, you surely feel that people's livelihood has been badly affected. Someone who is a rural person, who's been a farmer, can no longer access farm, cannot farm because he's been displaced, he's moved to other communities, and access to land becomes extremely difficult. Poverty is deep. Food crisis is one of the major things, and part of what people are doing is general food distributions and some conditional food intervention programs. Nutrition is a major crisis, particularly for children and lactating pregnant women. Is quite a major issue. Water, sanitation, and hygiene is quite a huge crisis as well as you get into those areas. The crisis is also a major protection crisis. A lot of women and children have been exposed very badly. So cases of sexual and gender-based violence that people experience, and you could see that with some of the major incidences that have happened since this crisis erupted, the kidnap of the Chibok girls, for instance, how some of them were forcefully married or adopted and violated, which they like to call marriage. So you find it's a huge a crisis for a country that has no much history of humanitarian crisis. I think this country has not experienced anything of this nature since the end of the Civil War in 1970. So the last time we had that kind of catastrophic humanitarian situation was in 1970, and so this is coming to a lot of organizations in Nigeria as a shock, because generally most Nigerian organizations are not much conversant or experience in humanitarian response. They are largely development organizations doing different forms of advocacy and providing development interventions. So having this shift to get into a large-scale humanitarian response like this is quite a problem, and also protracting. 11th year, we're getting to the 12th.
Wow, that is really something. So, in my knowledge and what I've been looking at, I thought it was 3 million displaced. Now it's 7 million. Yeah, that is, oh my goodness, that is a lot of people.
Yeah, over the years, scattered in different parts of the country. Significant number of them, because this spread across 3 states. You have Borno, you have Yobe, you have northern part of Adamawa State. So it's massive, and from Abuja all through different parts of the country, you find people of the Northeast and people who have been displaced staying in different host communities, and then some of the IDP camps, and we have in some parts of the 3 states.
Wow, that is really interesting. So you've mentioned a lot in terms of what the crisis is. So like when a humanitarian organization comes in, or for them to come into a host country like Nigeria, for instance, what is the key determining factor? What is the key determinant for human? I know you talked about wash services, nutrition, and some other livelihoods. So what are the key determinants for humanitarian organizations to come in and provide support?
Yeah, we have a major principle that drives us as humanitarian is this humanitarian imperative that the world is one, and we are all linked by this solidarity. And therefore, where there is any crisis that affects humanity, then we all have obligation. It's an imperative for us to actually go in there and respond to that. And humanitarian situations can occur as a result of different things. They could be natural disasters. And we've seen that like quakes, like tsunamis, like volcanoes, and how people are displaced and how we respond. And there are those that are human-made, violent conflicts. And lately, particularly in Africa, we've seen a lot of those crises. Apart from drought and famine occasioned by climate change and other seasonal variations that happen in some parts of East Africa and the Sahel, the major humanitarian crisis we face as a continent, largely as a result of violent conflicts, whether it's in Central African Republic, or it's in Mali, or it is in Burkina Faso, or it is in Nigeria, or it's in Congo, or it's in South Sudan, are largely driven by this violent conflict. So I think what determines it is actually largely about scale. Is a scale because there are some of these problems spreads across different parts of the world, and so the scale is what drives it. So how many people are actually being affected by this situation? You know that Nigeria is the largest country in terms of population mass and economy in Africa, and therefore what happens in Nigeria always happens in scale. And particularly a geographical region that is so large, like what we have in the Bay State. Bay means Borno, Yobe, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe State. So that was quite a huge thing at the time that it's happened, and how states have been overrun by this militant element, displacing people, dislocating children, pushing them out of school, and people lacking basic health facilities, livelihood being badly interrupted, poverty deepening, women being increasingly exposed to different kinds of gender-based situations that we all have to respond to, houses being destroyed, and completely people being caught up from their historical realities. So this is what drives it. This is part of the reason why a lot of organizations will actually have to come. And many organizations, before we actually do assessment. Then because each organization has a disaster rating, the rating that we do by assessing countries and actually see what is the rating and what stage is this particular humanitarian situation. And then that now determine whether you actually want to walk in there directly and work, or you want to work with local groups to see how those things can be delivered. Before this crisis, most time what many organizations around Nigeria do is relates to seasonal floods. The floods we have during rainy seasons, particularly in the months of July or August, when the rains are high and the rivers are overflowing their banks, and therefore most rural communities get washed away, and so you do that, and predictably you are able to plan, you can predict, and you could say what quantum of rain will actually come, because science has advanced so much that we are actually able to know what will happen, and then we prepare and then respond to that. The other kinds of other responses we do in the country was when there are communal or violent conflicts and people are displaced as a result of those conflicts, and then we intervene. In many times, some of those interventions don't go beyond 3 months, 6 months maximum. Everybody's over, people are back home. But today we are talking about a situation that has lasted 11 years, and there is no sign of abating.
Exactly. So you've said quite a bit. So you've said that with the key determinants for humanitarian services, pretty much natural disasters and human man-made disasters, like what is happening in Nigeria. So now you've been here. Humanitarian organizations have been on Nigeria now for over 11 years. So what would you consider so what kind of outcome indicators do organizations like CARE, which you're spearheading here in Nigeria, what do they use to measure success?
So basically, each organization, sometimes a lot of us are doing the same thing, but there are probably close to about 50 international NGOs in the country at the moment, responding to the situation in the Northeast. But each of us come with certain specialized programmatic background and experience, and we try as much as possible to complement each other in the field. And we try to complement each other in the field, and in doing that, we have different things that we actually want to achieve. So, for instance, by the time you are getting into the country, you've already developed your intervention plan, which is what you intend to do. That's your intervention plan, and those intervention plan will include which is what you intend to do. Can you?
I'm here with the one and only Dr. Hussaini Abdu, the country director of Care International. You know, a juggernaut that keeps me on my toes, that says, man, FY, you need to get on the grind and work harder so that we can continue to work to change the world. He's done so much. So I'm so excited to have him. So we've been talking about humanitarian services in Nigeria. One thing I did not know is that right now we have over 7 million IDPs, and they are scattered within all over the country and in neighboring countries like Chad and Niger, right, Dr. Hussaini? I think you said Chad and Niger.
Yeah, it's a small number, refugees. You know, when you are displaced internally, we say you are internally displaced.
Oh, internally displaced, then externally.
Then when you are external, it is refugees.
I see. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
And then I was saying that just about 30% of the internally displaced people are in the IDP camps, and then more than 70% of them are in different host communities. The number of those that are still currently in the Northeast region are different from the number that have vacated that part and have moved to different parts of the country. Some still staying in shanties and crowded areas to survive. Some of those areas have actually not been officially designated IDP camps in any way. So you go to Edo, you go to part of Lagos, you go to Kano, Kaduna, you find mass concentrations of people. Nobody, even in Abuja, there are about 3 or 4 different places like that where people, internally displaced people, are staying, but virtually it is not officially defined as IDP camps, and probably there may not even be systematic response to their situations in those places because we are dealing with a massive situation in the northeast of the country.
Okay, so we're just gonna go continue from where we stopped. So like we were asking before, like I was asking before. So what are some of the outcome indicators that humanitarian organizations like CARE, like I think you initially said you initially mentioned that initially some of these interventions are usually short term. This is 11 years. So what are you all looking for to see that? Okay.
Yeah, because you normally, humanitarian work generally, for those who are in the sector, we try to differentiate it from development work. And one of the basic difference we say is that humanitarian is more short term. It's about life-saving interventions, and development work is a bit more long term. And because you are talking about transforming the lives of the people, so it is more transformative. But the humanitarian side is largely more life-saving, so it's expected to be short term. So when you are having an 11 years old kind of crisis, it's actually, we call it a protracted crisis. And protracted crisis sometimes had its own frustrating element. One is that you could go into donor fatigue, the people who are funding you, because there are other emergencies emerging in other parts of the world. They want to shift resources there to respond to those emergencies because this one has become more protracted. How do we track outcome and what do we expect to see? Largely it's about life saving. So it's about responding to the immediate needs of the people. So how are people coping? If for those of us who are working in camps, what are they eating? What is the nutritional content? Are we able to transform that? Livelihoods, you're looking at, okay, how many people have been displaced and whose livelihood have been affected? Are they able to get into certain livelihood activities? What are they able to do? Most time it is short time for them to actually be able to survive. There are some market regenerative activities that you try to do because many times markets are affected, and therefore you make some cash transfers so that people can buy and sell among themselves, and therefore be able to transform and regenerate the market around that. How is that transforming the lives of the people? Are children able to access education? The basic principle in education in emergency is that children should be able to access education irrespective of their condition. So that's the principle. So are these children that are displaced, are they accessing education? Are they accessing schools? Those who have missed schools, are they being able to catch up? So those are some of those outcomes that we try to track. Women or people who have actually been violated, or gender-based violence and others, do they have certain referral services in terms of what to do? Have they been provided psychosocial support to actually manage their cases, and what is going on? People whose houses have been destroyed and our probably situation is shifting, are they able to return home? And when they return home, are they able to find shelter for themselves? So that's why shelter is one of the sectors that people work on. And then children that are being given birth under this kind of situation, what about what's their nutritional requirement, and are they growing well? And that's and then health services, sometimes basic health services, because people are also exposed to different conditions, crowded IDP camps or unhygienic IDP camp is prone to cholera and other foodborne and waterborne diseases, and therefore the measure is the outcome is that are we able to guard against those kind of situation. So it's about immediate. It is not necessarily transformational. It is about ensuring that people have survived and that their life have been made a bit bearable relative to the situation that they found themselves.
So what humanitarian organizations are looking for is the whole gamut. From the looks of things, you're looking at education, you're looking at livelihoods, you're looking at nutrition, you're looking at wash. I mean, it's the whole
It's
gamut.
a whole gamut. It's a whole gamut, and we are organized around sectors to allow for proper coordinations and all that. Because it's about people's life. It's about life, and then you are living a normal life. Probably you may even be poor, but displacements have deepened your poverty, because some of those things you're probably able to do to survive, to make a living, you are no longer able to do it because you have been uprooted from your original environment into a new environment that you don't understand. You don't have anything, you don't have anybody, and therefore the humanitarian groups is actually responding and trying to see that your life, although disrupted, but you are still able to live as a human being under probably a more difficult situation. But how do we make that unbearable situation? How do we lessen the burden on the individual through collective action?
That is quite comprehensive, and that's one thing that I'm also looking at, as a development practitioner. How do we make people understand the role of civil society and nonprofits and humanitarian organizations in national development? Really, because the government can't do everything. So it's like providing that extra support and actually that enabling environment so that they are able to now further work to have citizens that are just, like you said, that can just live basic lives, that can go to school, eat, work, and live. So I think those are
sometimes the challenge we have is that when you are not involved in the response, or you didn't see the reality of these people, sometimes you don't appreciate what people are doing or what people are going through. So people go through difficult periods and then moments that nobody prays to find his or herself in it. You have, look, part of what we do beyond what I mentioned earlier. In those early days, we were even involved in tracing children and linking children with their families because of displacement and the way people run away for safety and all that, children and the families have been cut off. And so you pick a child somewhere and you're probably spending months looking for the parent, and for some you may never find because those parents might have died.
Wow.
And then the parent is actually looking for the parents are looking for their children, and probably you may never find that child, probably because probably the child might have died, or the child may have followed another family to a different location. So it's always a very difficult situation, and these are the kind of things that many NGOs are doing and responding. One major soft part of it that a lot of people also don't understand, including government, is the psychosocial side of this whole thing. Many times people think that suffering and trauma are just things that we should just take. People don't know how that impacts on the entire life of the people, and that one particular traumatic situation could change somebody's life forever if you don't get support for people. And so the psychosocial side of it is soft. It is sometimes to government and other people, it may not be very tangible, but it's a huge thing because it requires specialized skills to actually be able to provide that psychosocial support for people who have experienced trauma of reading that your neighbor, the next person beside you, has fallen and died. You know, and that you have been removed, uprooted for all you know in what you know in your whole life. You've never dreamed that you are going to leave that place under that kind of difficult situation to another place. So those kind of things, or people who have been violated, raped, and all that, you must be able to provide safe space for them to actually talk out their problem, their challenges, their experiences, prepare them, provide those kind of support, and increases their resilience. So it is a whole gamut. A lot of humanitarian things are actually on the soft side. They are not necessarily on the physical, tangible side, like if we are providing water to deal with wash challenge, or nutrition, or you are providing health services, or you are providing shelter, or you are providing food. Those are more tangible things that people see. But the bulk of the work are even less tangible. They're about dealing with people, re-engineering people's life to them to face new realities and building their resilience. It's huge. It's a huge amount of work, and sometimes people don't see that.
Interesting. That is quite extensive. The psychosocial support is really something, because I'm sure there's a lot of PTSD, and especially from GBV, and also the violence that happens around. So you've talked about some of the challenges, and you've touched on how humanitarian organizations address those challenges. Can you just touch on it just a little bit more in terms of
There are a lot of challenges we face even as humanitarian, and one of the major challenges that we experience in the Northeast actually has to do with access. And there are different dimensions of access issues. One could be access to communities that actually needs our services. And so you are not able to reach them because of one, government policies that restrict you, military actions, and say this is military zone and there is something going on here, you can't go there. Or the other contending groups are present there, and they have no respect for humanitarian principles, and therefore you may be putting yourself in a harm way if you go to those areas, and therefore you leave people who actually need humanitarian intervention, who need support, you leave them to their fate because you are not able to access them. That's one access challenge, and it's been historically in the last 11 years, it's been a huge challenge in the Northeast. We cannot just wake up and say there's a problem here and start going. It's either because you have been restricted, movement have been restricted around those areas, or because there is certain security situation going on there that you can actually not be able to go. There are other access dimensions in terms of even the government appreciation of what is going on and what we are doing and how we are doing it. How are people, humanitarians, getting visas to come into the country to actually support this intervention? Visa has been a major issue for many of our expatriate colleagues who are coming in to support. Organizations itself, registration, different conflicting policies and out there on how you are supposed to be registered, where you are supposed to be registered, or each agency demanding. So multiple phases of registration and bureaucratizations that is actually required. And then also working in the context of the shrinking civic space, where the counter-terrorism of government policy, this is not peculiar to Nigeria, we are seeing it all over the world, where government counter-terrorist policies seems to restrict or shrink the civic space. So a lot of encumbering policies and operational frameworks are being defined by government every day, and that even you as a leader of such agency that is involved in humanitarian response, you are spending more time on bureaucratic processes with government and dealing with government than you're actually spending with communities. So relating with government at the national level, at the state level, and all those things, that expectations are so huge and cumbersome that it even undermines what you are able to do deep there in the field. So the challenges are really huge.
Okay, so I'm just going to transition, guys. If you have any questions for Dr. Hussaini, this conversation is deep, and it's very engaging, and things that we didn't really know about what's happening on ground, with the interventions and even managing stakeholder management and managing policies. This is a really interesting conversation. So if you have any questions, please put it in the comment section so we can continue this discussion. You've already talked about the government in terms of the bureaucracy with the government and how you work with them. So how have you developed a strategy, or you just go on a case-by-case basis on how you liaise with government agencies in making sure that you're able to conduct your intervention successfully?
Yeah, we do some of those things on case-by-case basis because sometimes you don't know what next is actually going to come up. And so therefore, when it comes up, you try to find a way of dealing with it. And then there are those we try to do on collective basis. We formed what we call the Nigerian INGO Forum, NIF, which we instituted to provide collective support and coordinate our own activities in the country. And so some of those issues that affect us as collective, we see them leading in and coordinating our engagement with this process and helping us to troubleshoot some of those things so that we can concentrate on our delivery. But again, we are also independent entities. So government sometimes relate with us as independent entities. And therefore, as those issues are coming and the challenges are popping up, we deal with them. So you have to, whether you have to register with the Corporate Affairs Commission, or you need a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Budget and Planning, or whether you want to register with the anti-corruption agencies on the platform of SCUMU, whether you have to register with the individual state government, whether there will be registration with other different ministries or line ministries that you are working with. So it can be cumbersome. And because again, sometimes the way we work, we also want ownership. We want community ownership. We want government ownership, because that is what strengthens our access and allow us to make impactful call programs and even create certain level of sustainability. So it's not something we just want to just get to the field and get going. You actually want people to own it. And so you invest time in mobilizing people and getting to that level of acceptance and of engagement. And then we also work in a world that is very conspiratorial, and therefore there are different kinds of conspiracy theories that you have to deal with from time to time, and we see them sometimes even in the social media. Oh, somebody say, oh, these NGOs are supporting the ones fueling this situation in the Northeast. They don't want the crisis to end, or they heard that they are actually the ones who are feeding Boko Haram. You hear those kind of things that are actually purely rooted in conspiracy theory than actually facts. Humanitarian organizations operate under certain principles. There are clear global principles that we all operate under, and therefore we are working under strict internal organizational discipline. And then you are also being disciplined by people who are as well supporting you. There are certain things that you don't. If you ask any of our staff and you see the kind of documents they have to sign to ensure that they are not going against some of those basic principles that we have established as humanitarian. So when some of those conspiracy theories are being thrown around for someone who is a leader in the sector, yes, some of us understand that this is where it is coming from. It's just conspiracy. But for younger people there, it can be very depressing. It can, it's just not okay, because people have sacrificed their life. We've lost colleagues in this battle, in this intervention. Some have been killed by insurgents. Some have died in accidents. So we are working under a massive risky situation, and we are taking huge risks to actually reach some of these people who have been affected by this situation. And I think that people are asking questions and getting to know, and that's why I agree to be part of this intervention, because this program, because I know that is people will get to know what is going on out there, and the challenges that we are facing as humanitarians.
Thank you. And again, this is very enlightening for all of us that are listening. This is really something. So how are like now we're talking about sustainability. Now, how are they able to sustain the impact of some of the services that you're rendering to a lot of these disaster areas? So how are they able to sustain it so that you all maybe, I don't know, I can't even say an exit plan, because the insurgency it's continuing. So, but the ones that you're able to work with, how are humanitarian organizations able to help beneficiaries become self-sustaining?
Yeah, what I've always said, and yes, I'm leading this, and I've led about 3 different organizations all through the history of this crisis. And as a Nigerian, what I've always tried to pass out there as a message is that, look, the northeast part of the country is also a very badly battered, economically battered part of Nigeria, even before the crisis. And for me, as a student of Nigeria, I will always say that it is development crisis in the northeast of the country that escalated to create this massive humanitarian situation that we have. Even before Boko Haram, on the education, one of the least school enrollment and completion statistics is in the northeast. Literacy rate is very low. Nutrition has been crisis. Stunted growth is actually one of the highest you can find. Poverty level is very deep in those areas, and therefore it creates a socio-economic condition that made people more susceptible to the kind of manipulation that took place, resulting in the kind of violence that we are actually seeing. And so this is how development crisis can wittingly or unwittingly transform into a humanitarian situation. And we've seen that. So my argument has always been that whatever, with the presence of international agencies and the kind of response we're having in the Northeast should be better than it was before the crisis. That at the time this crisis is ending, because ultimately it will end, We don't know when, but ultimately, people will not continue like this. It will end. And so when it ends, people's life should be better than what it was even before the crisis. So how are we capitalizing on this international presence, strengthening system, health system, education system, some of those social development issues that we are strengthening systems and building industry infrastructure to ultimately support what will happen after the crisis? And then what kind of new culture are we establishing in terms of systems or in terms of people's understanding of development? What livelihood opportunities are emerging that people can actually capitalize on when this crisis actually ends? What is the condition of, or because crises transform power relations within communities, particularly gender relations in our communities. We have seen in most cases female-led households have expanded significantly. Women are leading in many of those places, even though they are actually in a patriarchal society. How are we working on this new structure that is emerging to ensure that even at the end of the crisis, women come out more empowered, more on leadership role, and that their experiences in the crisis situation and the leadership that they have provided during crisis situation is transported to the post-crisis situation. For me, this is what I want to see. I don't want to see this crisis end and people are back into even what situation, and they are saying, and they begin to say, oh, maybe our life was better, we were getting more support during the crisis than after the crisis. So people need to own, people capitalizing on this thing. And that is why, for me, I'm a very big fan of this whole triple nexus things, development, humanitarian, and peace nexus. That these things are they are connected, and therefore we are not just doing humanitarian hop in and hop out, but we are providing that connection and creating the right atmosphere to support the lives of the people. While we are dealing with emergencies, we are also responding to the underlying causes of even the emergency in the first place. And for me, that's what I want to see, and that is what some of us are doing.
Interesting. That is a really good light to spin on it. And the possible light at the end of the tunnel from these interventions is that things would be better. The regions will be better than what we met. And I think I interviewed Mr. Soji Adeniyi a couple of weeks ago, and he went back to why Boko Haram even came in the first place, which was pretty much the lack of education. And you just mentioned that initially in terms of some of the lack of education and some of the basic necessities that were needed even back then before the crisis started. So it's really something that you even kind of highlighted that as well. So guys, I'm waiting for your questions. This is my last question for Dr. Hussaini. So if you have any questions from the audience, please put it down. I know I have a couple of comments that I'm going to read after this question. So Dr. Hussaini, I had an interview, Devsectorseries interview with Dr. Shetima, the director of the MacArthur Foundation, and he mentioned that Maiduguri is called ATM as a result of the corruption that goes on there. And I know that's multi-layered. I wanted to just get your insight and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there is no major humanitarian response that does not come with some of those allegations of corruption. And you also know that we are living in a country that is deemed to be fantastically corrupt, and therefore, yeah, and therefore everyone is seen to be corrupt unless you proved otherwise. Mm-hmm. But the way I react to this kind of situation is not to deny that there are corrupt people, just like we find everywhere, but it's the response itself is not corrupt. But there are individuals within the response who will try to beat the system. And one interesting thing about this sector is that we actually have strong controls and systems that are very strong, and that even if you perpetrate any act of corruption, if you are not caught in the immediate, ultimately you will be caught.
You'll get caught.
And
Right?
then we have mechanisms for dealing with such situation. You just know how it will go. There will be clear cases of dismissals. We will get whatever you have taken away from us. We will surely get it back, and we will take other actions depending on each organization's policies. Some we hand you over to the police for prosecution and all those things, and then we will pass your name across the entire sector so that it becomes even extremely difficult for you to get another job. We have made collective commitment that when we caught people doing that, then we send those names out so that the person does not jump from one organization and go to another organization. So our systems are strong, our processes are strong, and it is very easy to find out when those things happen. There is no NGO office that you will enter in this country or anywhere where you will not see certain numbers for whistleblowing and all that. And every day we have massive, strong investigation mechanisms, particularly when it comes to two things. One, fraud, then two is about issues around sexual harassment and exploitation and abuse. Those two are actually no-go areas within the sector. You don't touch it. And once you get there, you know that it is going to consume you.
Wow. So in terms of, you're saying corruption is there. What you're saying is corruption is there, but in the sector, especially in the INGO community, there are strong mechanisms to
You can't. You
those
have to guide
activities.
against it. You have to manage the risks of having it. You have to manage the risks. You have to guard against it. You have to prepare for it. So you build strong system. You build strong mechanisms to actually be able to deal with it, and you are decisive when it happens.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was pretty much very comprehensive. So I have a comment here from Jamil Alihu Mohammed. He says restrictions or having access to these IDPs are mostly a security situation and sometimes maybe the community leaders that require some incentives. These are issues faced doing access these IDPs in host communities. So do you have any thoughts on that? I think he's
That's part of the whole thing around incentives, because again, it's humanitarian response, and then sometimes again, everybody see this whole thing that everyone want to benefit, and then our attitude sometimes to what is deemed free. Sometimes it's about you want to cut corners, you want to be able to access, so you see some communities, gatekeepers emerging, and some of the probably maybe this is what Jamie is talking about, gatekeepers emerging, and some of those gatekeepers negotiating your access for them to So this kind of situations. But if you have strong community mobilizers and staffs at the level, they are able to overcome and manage those gatekeepers and still be able to access communities.
I see. That's really interesting in terms of because I know that there are issues like that even in the Niger Delta communities, because organizations go there, or organizations that are when these oil companies conduct CSRs, they have NGOs accessing some of these communities, and they have some of these challenges. So just being able to manage that, I feel like it's really key. So Dr. Hussaini, so do you have any final thoughts for us? This has been such an engaging conversation.
Thank you very much. I think it's quite an engaging, and thanks for this initiative of actually having this kind of conversations. And I think we are all making efforts to put that message out about what this very important sector is doing. The civil society sector, or development sector, like we call it, has become an important part of our society. It's an important sector. So you can't you can't dismiss it. The state or the government, the private sector, and the development sector or the society is part of this larger social formation, and therefore they have very important role to play. I think coming out and sharing how this work is done, how we are doing it, and the result we are getting, and the value we are adding to the society, for me, is quite important. I think we have passed that stage where we think our work we always speak for us. Yes, let the work be out there speak for us, but it is also important for us to project what we are doing out there, because a lot of people don't know what is being done and how it's being done. And sometimes we hear some of those side comments that are actually informed by ignorance.
Exactly.
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much for coming. And I think it really gave me a burden to want to do this even the more, because of, unfortunately, our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, what is happening over there.
Yeah.
I just believe that if not for the work of the development sector here in Nigeria, we might as well be heading to where our dear brothers and sisters in Afghanistan are going through right now, dealing with a failed state.
There are Nigerians there now.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Yes. So these are some of the challenges that we have. So communicating our work as development practitioners and what we're doing in the development sector is extremely key. So thank you so much for participating in that conversation, Dr. Hussaini.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Yeah.
Okay, everyone, you heard it from Dr. Hussaini Abdu, who is the country director of CARE International. Thank you again so much for hanging in there with us here on Dev Sector Series. Hope you enjoyed the session. We talked about humanitarian services in Nigeria, the successes and the challenges. Please share this discussion, like and share, because it helps the algorithm to see that, hey, this is an important discussion that needs to be shared with the entire public. We need to continue to understand the civil society role in Nigeria. We have a long way to go as a nation, but guess what? It could be worse. So stay tuned, guys, for more episodes of Dev Sector Series Wednesday at 12 noon. Thank you guys again. And guess what? Let's change the world together. Take care now. We were
and then the environment was cleaned up.
First time I was hearing about this stuff. Wow. It was totally new to me.
I dealt with social impact consulting.